a playwright doesn't write a play usually so that people can read it one day.
Right.
They write a play so that people can watch it.
That's really
we actually chose a topic ahead of
We did choose a topic ahead of time.
Talk about. So
This was from our wonderful assistant Nick.
Yes.
He asked us a bunch of questions in advance. Again, if you have any questions about just screenwriting related stuff, not about life problems. We're not psychotherapists or
I mean we're happy
psychotherapists. Is that a thing?
Psychotherapist.
Psychotherapist. Is that actually what they're called?
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just. Anyway, about the industry. But here's the question for today. So, screenplay as an independent art form is the general topic.
Right.
In a lot of books / discussions on the subject of screenwriting, it's seen as a major faux pas to include descriptions that aren't going to be translatable to screen. For example, emotional commentary, inner states of characters. Some writers, William Goldman and Shane Black come to mind, ignore common wisdom on the issue and include lots of non-visual spice to their descriptions. Do you think it's ever worth treating a screenplay as an independent art form and writing in a way that'll make it most appealing to potential writers? Is there a balance to be struck between a totally dry shooting script type screenplay and something a little punchier and more interesting? Discuss.
All right. I am definitely opinionated on this subject matter. So my answer would be his last comment, which is absolutely there is a balance to be struck. It is so boring to read a script that is just pure just like the description of he walks into the room, he closes the door. It's like, no, it needs to be an enjoyable read. The people reading it need to be able to sit there for 2 hours or whatever it takes them and enjoy reading your screenplay.
Yeah.
That being said, economics is very important as well.
Mm-hmm.
So you can't write a 140-page screenplay. Maybe William Goldman could, I don't know. But you can't just keep going on and expounding with all of the literary wonders that you may or may not have.
Mm-hmm.
And that can also become a bit of a drag because we are moving at the pace of a movie. This is not the pace of a book. It's the pace of a movie. It should read at the pace of a movie. And then my other opinion about the second half to this question, which is, what kinds of description are okay and what is a faux pas? First of all, fuck faux pas. That's my personal opinion. I don't think that there is a faux pas that applies to every single writer in every single instance. And you and I break this rule all the time. We love to use inner states of characters' emotion because I would argue that is visible on the screen. And there's different ways to do it, of course. Again, this isn't a novel. You need to write it as if it's paced and done like a screenplay. There's times I feel like if it serves the broader picture of what you're describing or talking about, there are times when you can use a sentence or two to say, this is as if the Colosseum were, in the background, even if it isn't, or what, I don't know. I'm just coming up with something.
Sure. Yeah.
And can it be seen on screen? No, clearly it cannot be seen on screen, but it gives you a feeling.
Yeah.
It gives you an idea of what you might put on screen, Right. Anyway.
Yeah, I echo your sentiments. I think, yes, it is always about making something an interesting read. I always love the opening words of James Cameron's Aliens, which is, and I'll butcher it, but it's along the lines of space, cold and distant, like the love of God. And immediately upon reading those opening lines, I go, oh, this person knows how to write. I know I'm going to get something more interesting, just like a tapestry of stars, you know, or whatever it is, or just space. A ship moves forward through screen, blah, 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 blah.
Right.
There's something, you know, poetic about it. And yet, ultimately, at the end of the day, this document is a functional document. A screenplay for the sake of a screenplay. Again, we always have to remember this is not like writing a novel. This is not the final product. The final product is a movie.
Yeah.
What can you do in your screenplay to, as best, conjure images in the minds of the reader? Ultimately, I think is your purpose.
Always.
Now
that's your North Star. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, the barometer of it is economic versus poetic. And I think it's always just got to be straddling that line between what is, you know, can I describe someone as, you know, the kind of girl you wouldn't bring home to your mom? Yes, absolutely. I get a feeling from that. And it's not, and yet actually that might be the most economic way of saying it, because what do I get when I think of that? I think of pierced, tattooed, you know, wearing slutty clothes, you know, foul mouth, all those things, you know, because that's generally what we in a society think of. The kind of person who you wouldn't bring home to meet your mom.
Right.
You
Unless
know,
we're in Downton Abbey, in which case it's a very different thing.
Of course, yeah, totally. Even, yeah, totally. But you just go, oh, there are, and that may be the most economical way of doing something like that.
Yeah.
That also makes you go, oh, you know, again, I'm not saying that that's the best example, but you know, it creates an image in the mind of the reader that perhaps isn't just practically what's on screen. Now, when it comes to describing inner emotional life or inner thoughts, I would avoid things like he thinks da 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 da.
Yes, no.
You know, that's not the best way to do it, because you actually can't fully show or see that.
You can't see what they're thinking, but you can see how the emotion behind what they're thinking would be on their face.
Or what actions they take because of it.
Or what actions they take because of it. And there's lots of different ways to write that kind of
there are.
You know, thing.
There are.
You know? We will sometimes write things like, you know, she sits down behind the couch waiting for the guard to pass. Shit, what if he sees me? You know?
Absolutely.
And it's like,
yes.
I'm getting the emotion of that's what's on her face.
Totally.
I can see her think that.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah, thinking back to something like The Princess, it was like, shit, that was her chance. Stuff like that, where you go like, oh, I get
it's okay. I think you have to use it sparingly, but I think it's okay to also sometimes talk to the reader.
Yes.
I mean, in that sense, like there are certainly times where you will break even and say, from this point forward, think about da 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 da.
Yeah.
And you are, like you're saying, you are writing a document that is meant to turn into a movie. Yeah. There is not really a massive audience who read screenplays as art forms. It's actually even less so, I would say, than plays. You know, people read plays as their own unique form, even though they're not intended to be read; they're intended to be performed.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation, actually, because we all studied Shakespeare in school.
Yeah.
And we read it from the English literature perspective.
Right.
These are regarded as
iambic pentameter, and
absolutely as, you know, as works of literature, and yet their intended purpose was to be performed by groups of actors on a stage.
Yeah, he didn't
About
write them, or a playwright doesn't write a play usually so that people can read it one day.
Right.
They write a play so that people can watch it.
It's really interesting. I've never, in my entire life, I've never thought about why screenplays aren't in English literature classes. You know?
Well, I think that for the reason that we're discussing, they're not.
But plays aren't either. But it's interesting. Plays aren't either.
But
you know?
I think the difference is, and maybe it'll be different in 100 or 200 years.
Maybe it will be.
You know, I think that live theater has become thought of as a high form of artistic expression, partly because it goes all the way back to Greek and predate that even. And so some of the oldest literature that we have are plays and sonnets and songs, right? And so I feel like people have been studying those things since before movies even existed.
And I guess as well, from a perspective of a play, it is very much about the dialogue. Plays are primarily dialogue. I would say 98% dialogue. If you open up any play, you're going to see dialogue, interspersed perhaps with small stage directions here and there.
Almost all dialogue, yes.
But almost all dialogue. So again, it's a slightly different,
maybe a description of a scene.
Yeah, totally. A bit of a setting description, etc. So really what you are exploring through that really is character and relationship.
Yeah, and language.
But in a screenplay, you are primarily concerned with what is seen.
Yeah, and I genuinely do think that there is a certain amount of bias towards how new, relatively speaking, movies and television are.
Sure.
I think that one day people will read great screenplays to say, oh, this was a form of storytelling that was in the 20th and 21st and onward century was a big deal for how people communicated in the same way that we think of live theater. I think that you know, interestingly, and this goes to the question at hand, one does not write a play like a novel. You don't put in all that description. You don't put in extraneous poetic lines of action. You sparsely intersperse what needs to be there, because ultimately the play is, the story is being told through the dialogue. In a movie, it's far more of a medium whereby action and visual elements are shown on the screen without people.
Right.
So, and even with people, like just the way the medium is. So, like a playwright, when you're writing a movie, there is a certain thing to be said for going as sparse as possible to describe the picture that you're trying to paint.
Right.
With a play, as we were just saying, it's like, what kind of picture are you trying to paint? Well, if it's a proscenium theater, you know, you're painting a box and you're saying there's a bed and a couch and a sofa off to, you know, and a dresser off to the right. There's your picture. Everything else
is he enters, she enters.
Or, you know, like, maybe it's she drops the pipe on the floor. But most of when you're imagining the picture, you're imagining it as people on the stage.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Because again, coming from theatre, you have the freedom to block it. Ironically, it's got, you know, but you know, it's blocking being where you're going to go in a scene, where you're going to move, how you're going to move. It's never, you're never reading a play when it goes, they crossed down right.
No.
You know, it might say they cross to the chaise longue and sit. But again,
very rarely.
It's
It
rare.
happens,
Really
but it's rare.
Yeah.
And I think that, in movies and in television, the director and everybody else is given a lot of leeway as well. Like, just because you write something on the page doesn't mean it ends up on the screen, as we know.
As we know. It changes on the day.
It changes on the day. They go, you know what? This isn't working. Guys, let's do something different.
Yeah.
Because it's not working.
Sure.
And so that document that you're writing is it's the jumping off point.
Yeah.
And we've talked about this a lot as well, is there's also, who are you writing for? And that's why I think it's about straddling the line, because when you're trying to sell a screenplay, you're not writing for production. You're writing for the reader, whether that's the director reading it, the actor reading it, the studio reading it, the producer reading it. They are reading it. They're not, it's not a technical read. It is a creative read. They're imagining the movie. Hopefully, if you've done your job well, they're watching the movie in their mind while reading it.
Yeah.
And so I think you have a little bit more leeway to create pictures clearer.
Yeah.
And if you do it really well, you won't need to change that too much for a shooting script, because you'll also have included all the technical things that are needed to move to that next draft.
Yeah.
But when you start to worry about page count and rewrites happen and you're doing studio things and you go, well, do I need to say that? And we ask that question all the time. We'll have a beautiful piece of action and we'll go, this is too long. And if we took 2 lines out, we'd save an entire page on our script. So how do we say the same? How do we create the same picture in 2 lines less than what we have? And those are the compromises you're constantly making as a writer. There's a couple of comments on this. LinkedIn user says, hey guys. Hey, LinkedIn user. Awesome. And then Chris M. I think one of the first rules you learn to break as you improve your screenwriting craft is utilizing these unfilmable to convey emotion and feeling tactically sparingly, of course.
Yeah.
And in his humble opinion, those wordsmithing choices, which come from the writer's POV, help define your voice as a writer. Absolutely. I agree, Chris.
Yeah.
That is why reading James Cameron's Aliens doesn't read like reading, probably Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins.
Totally.
And that is your voice as a writer. That is how you convey pictures in the reader's mind. And it's
you can also, I thought, what script did I read last year? I loved it. It was I forget what it was. About the karate dude. It was Nate Davis was talking about it a lot. Anyway, the script itself was fucking hilarious. In the action. In the action, I was laughing my ass off because it was so self-aware that it was a script. And it was so clever. I'll forget.
And that's a choice, right?
And that was a choice.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
A Quiet Place, infamously, is a very short screenplay with lots of pictures.
Tons. The first draft.
And that was a choice. Those writers brilliantly said, you know what? We're going to convey the image in the reader's mind, but we're going to do it in our own way.
Absolutely.
Because ultimately, as we've said, that's the point. Yeah. You're writing a movie and you're writing a document that someone's going to read, and they better be able to see the movie in their mind. It doesn't really, nothing else matters. Honestly, all the rules, you could throw them all out the window if you create the most exciting movie that somebody's watching in their head while they're reading your document.
Absolutely. Yeah, agreed. And that is Shop Talk.
Shop Talk.